The split between President Donald Trump and key NATO allies has widened again as the U.S. Israel war with Iran grinds on, with European capitals resisting pressure to join a proposed maritime blockade while trying to craft their own separate plan to restore shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. At the center of the latest clash is a blunt message from London. Britain will not take part in a blockade aimed at Iran's ports, even as the United States escalates economic and military pressure to force Tehran to reopen Hormuz and accept terms to end the conflict. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's public line has been unambiguous. He said, "We're not supporting the blockade." And he added, he said, "We're not getting dragged into the war." He framed the decision as a matter of national interest, signaling that however intense the diplomatic push from Washington becomes, Britain will not be pulled into an open-ended conflict it did not choose. France has taken a parallel position, stressing that it will not become a party to the war, while pushing a different model, a defensive multinational effort focused narrowly on freedom of navigation in Hormuz, separate from U.S. and Israeli operations. President Emmanuel Macron laid out that approach in a public message, drawing a hard boundary between escorting civilian shipping and participating in wartime coercion. He said, as regards the Strait of Hormuz, in the coming days, together with the United Kingdom, we will organize a conference with those countries prepared to contribute alongside us to a peaceful multinational mission aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait. Adams, then he underscored the political red line. He said, the strictly defensive mission, separate from the warring parties to the conflict, is intended to be deployed as soon as circumstances permit. That distinction, defensive protection of shipping versus an offensive blockade designed to choke Iran's trade, has become the alt line running through NATO's internal debate. For Trump, the refusal looks like a betrayal in a crisis he says directly impacts global energy flows and U.S. security. For European leaders, the blockade proposal risks widening a war they argue NATO was never consulted on in the first place. Trump has publicly portrayed the allies' stance as another example of Europe benefiting from U.S. power, while refusing to back Washington when the U.S. calls in support. In remarks delivered amid the war's escalation, he accused NATO of failing a basic test of solidarity and warned that the U.S. commitment to the alliance is not unconditional. He said, I'm very disappointed in NATO. They weren't there for us Aztecs. He argued that Washington has borne the cost of the alliance for decades and that, in his view, allies are now hesitating when U.S. forces are under strain. He said, we pay trillions of dollars for NATO and they weren't there for us. He also made clear he is weighing policy consequences. He said, we'll see what happens. And he warned that the alliance itself could be reviewed through a harsher lens. He said, I think that's going to be under very serious examination. Behind the scenes, the temperature has been even higher. Reporting in multiple outlets has pointed to Trump's anger at European capitals that restricted U.S. access to bases, airspace, and refueling options connected to the Iran operation limits that in wartime translate into real friction for logistics and strike planning. Those tensions were a major focus when NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte traveled to Washington in early April for meetings with Trump and senior U.S. officials at a moment when White House rhetoric about the alliance had again turned volatile. Rutte, a veteran of European politics, now leading NATO, acknowledged that the conversations were not polite formalities. He said these conversations were frank and open. He did not deny Trump's frustration. Instead, he tried to put it in context, making the argument that European governments move through coalition politics and legal constraints, and that support can be real even when it's not immediate or unlimited. Rutte also leaned on the strategic logic NATO was built around, that the alliance protects North America as much as Europe, because the primary nuclear threat is still anchored in Russia's arsenal and its undersea deterrent. He pointed to the geography of the North Atlantic and the blunt reality that Russian capability is aimed at the U.S. homeland, not just European territory. An argument meant to remind Washington why NATO remains central even while the Middle East burns. But the Iran war has created a different kind of test, one not written into NATO's founding treaty in the same way as an attack on a member state. Trump's position and the position of his supporters has been that the scale of the war and its consequences for global oil shipping effectively demand allied participation. Many European governments, by contrast, have insisted that a U.S. Israeli campaign against Iran is not a NATO mission, not an Article 5 case, and not something their publics will support if it expands. That political reality is now shaping tangible restrictions. Spain has emerged as one of the most explicit opponents of being operationally pulled into the conflict. Madrid moved beyond private reluctance and imposed formal limits, denying the use of jointly operated facilities on Spanish soil for Iran-linked operations, and later expanding the policy to close Spanish airspace to U.S. aircraft involved in strikes. The Spanish position matters because Spain hosts strategically valuable nodes, air and naval infrastructure that supports U.S. movement into the Mediterranean, onward to the Middle East, and back. When those routes are constrained, aircraft and tankers must reroute, refuel elsewhere, or operate with narrower margins. Italy, too, has been reported to have denied permissions linked to refueling at a key base in Sicily. Another reminder that even close U.S. partners can impose restrictions when domestic politics, legal assessments, or fear of retaliation at home change the calculus. For Trump, these decisions are not technical footnotes. They go to the heart of what he has demanded from NATO since long before this war, that U.S. allies deliver concrete support, not just statements and symbolism. He has repeatedly argued that America pays too much, does too much, and receives too little when it faces high-pressure contingencies. Now, as Washington seeks to control maritime traffic around Iran and push Tehran toward concessions, those same alliance arguments have returned with more urgency and more anger. The dispute is also unfolding in the shadow of a global energy shock. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical choke points, and disruptions there ripple rapidly through oil prices, shipping, insurance, and de-inflation expectations. Even countries that want no part in a war have powerful incentives to restore commercial traffic. That is why Britain and France are trying to occupy a narrow middle lane, refusing a blockade that could look like joining Trump's war while constructing a separate defensive coalition mission that can be sold domestically as de-escalatory and lawful, escorting shipping, deterring attacks, and reopening lanes without being seen as a combatant. But for Trump, the distinction may be too fine. From his perspective, a defensive mission that avoids pressure on Iran could be read as an attempt to sidestep the hard choices while still benefiting from U.S. action. As these arguments play out, Trump has continued to use the most politically charged language possible about alliance, solidarity, suggesting not just disappointment, but consequences. He has signaled that the U.S. relationship with NATO is conditional on allies acting as allies and that he is prepared to rev. Is it long-standing commitments if he believes European capitals are choosing comfort over shared risk? In Europe, leaders are bracing for that possibility and for a wave of U.S. retaliation that could take many forms: diplomatic downgrades, reduced cooperation, or pressure through trade and defense decisions. The mere suggestion of punishment has already intensified anxiety in capitals that fear being singled out, especially those that have been most outspoken against the war. Still, London and Paris appear determined to hold the line. Starmer's stance has been framed not as hostility toward the United States, but as refusal to be pulled into a conflict that Britain did not initiate and does not control. Macron's stance has been framed not as abandonment of maritime security, but as insistence on a firewall between protecting navigation and actively prosecuting a war. And Rutte's role has become what it often is for a NATO Secretary General during a transatlantic crisis: absorbing. Anger, translating positions, and trying to keep an alliance intact when its most powerful member is openly questioning the value of staying. For now, the core reality is simple. The United States is demanding more visible, risk-bearing support in the confrontation with Iran, and several NATO allies are saying no, offering instead a different mission on different terms under a different political banner. Whether Trump treats that as a legitimate compromise or as another unforgivable failure of solidarity may decide not only the next phase of this war, but the next phase of NATO itself.